right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of AppSec 101. My name is Andrew Garrett, and I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Fortify by OpenText. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Stan Wisseman, who is the Chief Technologist for OpenText CyberSecurity for North America. Stan has been involved in application security for well over 2 decades now. And Stan, I wanted to pass the mic over to you to maybe elaborate on that a little more.
Yeah. So I was actually leading the software security consulting team at Citadel in 2001. But even prior to that, when I was at Ford Aerospace in Silicon Valley, we were doing manual code reviews and Fortran for this Air Force ground station project we were doing. We had a whole bunch of security associated with it back in '88. So goes a long way, and I'm so glad that manual code reviews are not in practice as much anymore. Though, if you look at the survey we just did with dark reading, it was kind of surprising that manual code reviews are still being done by quite a few folks, especially small businesses.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah, well, Stan, as always, it's a pleasure to have you joining me today. Your experience and your background, you always have a lot to bring to the table. So thanks again for joining me.
Good to be here.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in. Today, we're talking about DAST versus IAST. And mainly, we're talking about why DAST is more advantageous than IAST. We have a white paper, if I'll put the link in the description, but it's called 5 Reasons Why DAST is Better Than IAST. And we're going to touch on some of those reasons today in our discussion. So for our viewers who are maybe joining us for the first time, let's set the scene a little bit and give a little bit of background on DAST and IAST. So first of all, what is DAST and how does it work?
So DAST is Dynamic Application Security Testing. It's an acronym we throw around quite a bit. And it's a process of analyzing a web application through the front end to find vulnerabilities through simulating an attack. And this type of approach evaluates the application from the outside in by attacking it in a way that a malicious user or bad actor would. And some refer to this as a black box testing kind of methodology, because the DAST tool conducts its vulnerability assessment without access to the application source code. But you could also argue that it's more of a gray box kind of testing approach, because you do provide authentication information many times to be able to do a better crawl of the application. And the basic idea behind DAST is that you send HTTP requests to the application and analyze the responses that come back. After the DAST scanner performs simulated attacks, it looks at the results to see if the results are in the expected results set and identifies any security vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, broken authentication or authorization, and common web application attacks, including some of the API attacks you'd expect.
Yeah, and I also want to mention in regards to DAST, for our viewers that maybe want a little bit of a deeper dive, that you want even more information, we do have another episode called What is DAST on our Fortify Unplugged channel. So I'll leave a link for that in the description as well.
Right.
But now that we have an understanding of DAST, let's talk about IAST. So what is IAST and how does it work?
Yeah, so IAST stands for Interactive Application Security Testing. AST is the common denominator, right, between DAST, IAST, Static Application Security Analysis, or SAST. And it examines the behavior of the application while it's exercised by either an automated functional test, a human tester, or any kind of activity that actually is interacting with the application's functionality. So it's similar to DAST in that it does perform this kind of security testing on a running application. However, instead of sending requests to the application and analyzing the responses that come back, IAST instruments the application code to monitor its behavior. And at the core, an IAST tool has sensor monitors or special software libraries or agents that are actually included in the application code. And these sensor modules, whatever form they may exist in that particular tool, they monitor the behavior as the app runs, tracking information such as inputs and outputs of each function, the values of the variables, and the flow control of the code. When there is some kind of potential vulnerability that pops up that's being detected, the IAST tool raises an alert and provides information about the nature of the issue that is discovered, as well as the location in the code where that vulnerability is found.
So we have DAST, we have IAST, we have SAST. There's mobile application security testing. MAST is
That's
another
right.
one. There may be another I'm not thinking of right now, but it's all application security testing. And so let's talk about the differences now. How would you characterize the differences in the testing approaches between DAST and IAST?
So IAST is a hybrid approach that combines both dynamic and static analysis methods. And when functionally testing the app or exercising it in some manner, right? But just say it's associated with some kind of functional test, perhaps by a QA tester. The IAST sensor modules or agents study every pattern that a data transfer occurs within the application, regardless of whether it's dangerous or not. It's also running on the server side and can't really provide a view into any of the client side vulnerabilities. So that's one pretty big distinction. On the DAST side, yes, DAST is also analyzing the behavior of the application while it's running, but instead of instrumenting the code, DAST tests the application by sending those various signals that we talked about, right? And DAST tools can be used in the entire application. So you're getting the results from the server side as well as the client side. And you could also specifically focus on a particular URL or form. As far as how you actually run a DAST scan, you can point and click. As far as running and executing a test on a particular schedule or trickle it manually, or you can also integrate it in to CI/CD pipelines and have that as part of your normal security testing.
Okay. Well, something I always hear, Stan, when talking about application security testing is the need for speed, right? These developers, they're creating their code, they're building these applications. A lot of times, they don't want to take a lot of time to, bog things down and run a lot of security tests. And while they recognize the importance of it, how does DAST really address that need for speed without
Yeah,
sacrificing the coverage and depth?
right. And let's face it. I mean, one of the good things about DAST is the results does provide high confidence of exploitability if it finds a vulnerability and clearly surfaces application security risks, which is great. But complete DAST scan can take a long time for a large application, and this digital transformation that we're going through, a lot of organizations, that require rapid delivery of new functionality, that they're accelerating their application delivery process. That means that modern apps are developing, more quickly, and in their CI/CD processes, they are typically pushing out more releases, and we need to automate. And that what we really need is to have a more agile DAST process to keep up with the pace of modern development. So
Right.
DAST needs to be able to integrate in with the processes and pipelines to be able to scale horizontally as well as vertically in the environment. And as I mentioned, historically, DAST scans, the turnaround time, have precluded their integration into stringent CI/CD pipelines and workflows. However, we're starting to see developers, shifting DAST left in their life cycle, and they want to be able to actually extend the use of tools like Fortify, Web Inspect, and Scan Central DAST beyond what we typically have seen in QA hands or the late lifecycle pen testing, right? So they want to be able to do that, and customers are starting to leverage REST APIs that we are exposing and web inspect and run that fully automated solution that integrates DAST into their pipelines and workflows. Enabling them to test earlier also enables them to reorient their development teams and processes to do some of these tests prior to the late lifecycle security gates they typically did before. And when you compare DAST versus IAST, one of the things I do want to mention about IAST that could impact the performance of the application is, again, you are instrumenting that app with these libraries, and that's performing a real-time analysis on the behavior of the app. And we're not doing that with DAST. We're actually, again, not impacting the application performance because we're only sending inputs to the application and observing what comes back. So I think, again, depending on the application, you could have performance degradation by using IAST because it does instrument the code.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up the importance of integration and automation because, as you said, the rate at which apps are being developed is only increasing, and security needs to keep pace, and it can't be left out. So, a lot of it is, when it comes to testing, which method is going to be used. So let's talk about that. When it comes to DAST and IAST, which approach is easier to actually set up and use?
So again, I believe that DAST is easier to set up and use, and it requires fewer resources and expertise to instrument the code like you'd have to do in IAST. I mean, without a doubt, as you transition from the classic point and click, and you're going to scan an application with DAST, that's pretty easy to do, right? You have to certainly, perhaps, if you want to crawl more effectively, add the authentication that you need to be able to progress in the application. But you can do that and add those credentials. And if you want to integrate it with your CI/CD workflows, you also have to integrate DAST into the right places within your workflows. And that could take some time to set up. But overall, you're not impacting the application directly by injecting these libraries in there. So I think that, again, that makes it easier to add DAST to your testing regime.
Yeah, and that leads me into my next point because the way that I understand how IAST works is you, you are creating the environment for the IAST to scan, right? So it's really limited to what you thought of when creating that test. Um, so maybe let's talk about that a little more. How is IAST limited and what it can actually test?
So it's limited in the sense that, again, it's dependent on how you're exercising the app. And so if you have, for example, a functional test script or a human tester who's just manually exercising the app, that's all they're going to really be exercising is what's in the script or what the tester thinks of, right? It's not looking at the entire set of potential inputs that could be coming in. And if you are blind to some functionality that exists in the application, then it's not going to become visible to you as far as the vulnerabilities that are part of that code, as well. And so with DAST, you're not only able to do the functional testing and exercise that way too. We have something called functional application security testing. So you can actually do something similar to what you do with IAST, but you're also able to, crawl and find vulnerabilities beyond that scope. Our research has shown that a majority of applications tested have at least one high or critical vulnerability, not listed in the OWASP top 10, right? I think you've reported on these kind of stats before in some of the other videos you've done, right?
Mhm.
And I think, again, if you look at some of the vulnerabilities that we are aware of, it's not all on the server side, it's also on the client side. And so the fact that IAST is also just looking at server side because that's all that's been instrumented, right, is the server side, you're going to potentially miss out on client side vulnerabilities. And so again, if you look at DAST, it's scanning like a pen tester would. It downloads and executes the client side code within the context of the application, and this allows for exploiting DOM-based attacks and inspecting the third-party libraries that might be hosted on a CDN or another repository. WebInspect even reports the client-side libraries discovered for this hacker-level insights feature. So I think, again, if you're trying to get a comprehensive risk picture of that application, you need to have both sides, and you get that with DAST and you don't with IAST.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking of the saying that goes, "You don't know what you don't know,"
Right.
and IAST is essentially that, right? And like you said, the benefit with DAST is it is testing what you don't know or what you haven't thought of, right? Because it is replicating more of that pen testing approach. So let's talk about that a little more. So how does DAST replicate what an attacker would do with this outside-in testing?
So again, if you look at the full context, the hacker is going to take advantage of whatever is in that operating environment, right? And so you can look at aspects like the proxies and WAF firewalls and other things and how they're configured. And when you're doing the dynamic testing, that environment is also something that is feedback to you because you're getting to actually see the results coming back from that test. So this allows for you to target your scan the different scenarios. You can scan the environment in which the application is running. You can scan the server itself. You can scan specific DOM-based attacks that you want to see whether or not they're actually effective or not. So as an example, consider a basic weak SSL cipher vulnerability. While static testing and dynamic testing can both detect that weakness, the finding itself is heavily tied to the application implementation and production. And so dynamic testing will provide a view of the web server configuration for instances where SSL is terminated outside of the application. So that's critical. And DAST compliance scans are also possible, including GDPR, PCI, and DISA-STIG. So that is also helpful to be, if you have certain things you need to be compliant with for your applications, you can report out whether or not they actually are meeting those requirements.
It sounds to me, Stan, like DAST can really scan any technology. Am I correct in thinking that? Is that one of the advantages of DAST?
It is a technology that's been around for quite some time, for a couple decades now, and it has matured along the way. I mean, we ran into challenges with single page apps, SPAs, had to overcome that. We've had to overcome two-factor authentication, and now we can do multiple forms of two-factor authentication. But it has the ability to scan and find vulnerabilities in modern applications as well as legacy applications. And that's one of the advantages as well, in the sense that you don't have to have the source code. You can have with high fidelity results, with high confidence that it finds things. And if you don't have access to the source code, you can still get a risk posture of that application. Fortify WebInspect has many thousands of checks, and the breadth of the scanning technology that we are leveraging, especially with our reworked and re-engineered engine, has certainly transitioned us to another level from where we were, again, 15 to 20 years ago. I think the fact that we are able to scale up the enterprise needs is a big factor.
Absolutely. The scaling up is a big factor. As you touched on as well, the automated two-factor authentication is a big factor. I know that's something customers have been asking for, and that's something that WebInspect has recently developed. One of these new
Right.
features is you can scan in these 2FA environments And when you're hit with this two-factor authentication, it will keep scanning, right? And so that's a big feature. And I know that DAST will continue to evolve, as you said. It'll keep evolving over the years, but the hope is that if I may put a plug in for Web Inspect here, the hope is that Web Inspect continues to be a leader in the industry when it comes to dynamic testing. So, well, Stan, we're getting a little short on time here, but I did want to leave you a moment for some final thoughts. Do you have any closing remarks or final thoughts you'd like to leave with us today?
Yeah, we started off sort of joking about all these different AST methods, and I believe that each one has different strengths. I don't think that any single technique is really necessarily going to give you that full picture of the risk posture of the application. And I think a number of organizations try out multiple techniques. I mean, as you know, as we just talked about, we recently published that dark reading report, State of Code Security 2023. And the majority of organizations have a hybrid approach, especially large ones, right, as far as their different testing techniques. The majority of larger organizations are using SAST. That I think it was over 65% are using SAST. 45% are using DAST, and less than 40% are using IAST right now. And I think more folks are going to consider using DAST going forward. And I think the survey reflected that. Part of the reasons that I believe that I see the days of this dedicated security or QA tester, analysts being the ones that launch these dynamic tests, those days are numbered, is because of the way modern development has just increased the release numbers and the number of applications that we're seeing in the environment. So you need to have a DAST solution that can integrate with all your processes as well as scale. And that's what we've been able to do. We've been able to provide a more agile and scalable DAST solution. And I think that the re-engineering of Web Inspect for that kind of scalability and provided the upgrade that we need in the industry. So I do think that DAST is here to stay. And I do think it has value in the set of testing techniques that are applied to the applications, and there are real advantages to it.
Yeah, I agree. And Stan, I know you're a big advocate for DevSecOps, putting the sec in DevSecOps, right? And I think we'll see more of that going forward, as you said. More integration, more automation, and more developers who are enabled to do this testing as a part of their build lifecycle. So with that, I'd like to again thank you, Stan, for your time today. Always great insights. And to our viewers who are watching this episode, thank you for watching. Please remember to leave a comment and also to leave a like, and please subscribe to Fortify Unplugged if you haven't already. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Andrew.